Hi everyone, I'm here today with the lovely Sharon, and she's from Functional Family, and today's podcast is in relation to tips on how to have families reduce overwhelm when it comes to having children who may have autism or ADHD. But I think the best person to introduce herself would be Sharon. So Sharon, can you please give us an introduction as to who you are and what you do?
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here. So my name's Sharon Collon, and I am an award-winning credentialed ADHD coach, consultant and parenting expert. And I have the best job in the whole world. I get to support beautiful families navigating ADHD, and a real passion for me because I also live it every day. I have 3 beautiful sons we have ADHD, OCD, ODD, that's oppositional defiance disorder for people, specific learning disorders, sensory processing disorders, all of the letters, right? And all of the things. And my husband as well. And I'm very, very passionate as a families trained coach at supporting the whole family unit. So we're not just throwing our resources at the child that needs a little bit of extra support. I'm looking at the whole family dynamic, which is why I'm so excited to talk to you today, because I know this has a big impact, and I'd love to share some tips to be able to support families.
Yeah, and I'm super excited about today as well. So when it comes in relation to family law, we're talking about before, you kind of had 60, I had kind of like 70, 80% chances of families with children, or families that have ADHD or autism, within the household, that the separation rates, are like, between 60 and 80. So the odds are really stacked against you, which is really, really sad. And, if we can help save a relationship, with the caveat being that, everybody's safe and there's no DV or anything like that. But most relationships can fail because of the frustration in relation to having your family, but then having extra things on top of that. So, you mentioned, you've got 3 boys, they have ADHD, they go, all the letters, that can create a whole pile of extra stress on families. So, when the odds are stacked against you, it's really sad to see. So if there are things that we can do to help save a relationship, I would much rather do that than the legal process, believe it or not. People might not believe me, but I really do, because most relationships are due to frustration with things like this. So really looking forward to discussing some tips with you. Having said that, even trying to work out what language to use, I found really overwhelming. So I don't necessarily like the term disability or special needs. For some reason, that just sit a little bit uncomfortable with me. So I was using the term additional needs, and then that raised the topic with us that there are so many different things that it can be called, and some things are now no longer considered appropriate. So when you're dealing with ADHD, autism, kids that may require that additional assistance, what kind of terminology should we be using so as to try to not offend, I suppose, families, people?
Yeah, this is a really great question. I'm so glad that you asked it. And I want you to know that even as a collective, I've been in this space for a long time, that we can't even agree of what is offensive and not offensive. So please don't feel like you have to, worry about getting it right all the time. So when we're talking about, we'll use ADHD as an example, ADHD, autism, twice exceptional, even dyslexia falls under the neurodivergent banner. And that simply means like the people that have the typical brain is neurotypical, and people with a neurological difference, we're grouping them under being neurodivergent. And so all that means is that they have a neurological difference. And, I think when it comes to language, because, what we're seeing is, people getting offended about different things. I don't really get too worried or caught up in language. I know a lot of people do, and it's very important to them, but I don't, because what I'm listening for is intent. If you're saying things with an intent to belittle someone or make someone feel bad or less than, then I'm coming after you, right? But if you're saying things, you know, to try and communicate and understand, and you've got that pure intent, I don't care what language people use, really, because I think it's what we need to focus on is that intent piece. And I listen to my children, you know, talk about themselves and how they identify with their own neurological difference. And, you know, it changes from time to time. They're quite comfortable with different things. And as long as the intent is there and people are referring to it with a kind intent, I'm kind of sweet with it.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm going to look at it from that perspective, because it's definitely from my perspective, it's not ill intent. It's like, I don't, you know, mindful of to not offend, I suppose, but using the wrong term. And because it's an area I don't have a lot of knowledge with, because thankfully, unthankfully, it's not something I've had to worry about. But for me, being a lawyer, I think it's definitely something we need to be across, because it's going to be really important in relation to, if we are dealing with a separation, in relation to co-parenting and making sure that the additional needs required of the kids are taken into account, instead of, you know, a judge going, okay, well, you can see your dad or your mum 2 weekends a month. Like, that's it. Like, you know, that's not necessarily, it's probably not going to be good for any child. But, you know, especially when those additional needs are there, I really want to make sure that's taken into account. So, you know, it's going to be the best interest of the child. And, you know, I think that's really important, especially in these situations.
Yeah, and I really want to empower people to just ask the person who is neurodivergent to say, what do you want? How would you like me to refer to you? Or how would you like me to, you know, to refer to, you know, to what's going on for you here, or, you know, what, you know, to your strengths, or ask them. Most of them are very, very open to having that discussion with you. And it's quite empowering to have people ask you, you know, and ask for your preference.
Yeah, definitely. So, so today we're hopefully, well, if there is an additional stress in your relationship, or just maybe in general, you could be a single parent, or you might be, you know, co-parenting, you want some additional tips in relation to how you can maybe be more on the same page in relation to your kids that maybe have that neurodivergency. Before I go, I'm going to go back a little bit. So we're talking about separation being high within families of additional needs. Did you say you had some stats on that before I jump the gun and go forward again?
Well, I think it's important to look at why, right? So we know that the divorce rates, separation rates are higher when you have, if we're going to go into my niche here, and I'll say ADHD here, but please know that ADHD it's a wide spectrum, right? So whenever we're talking about ADHD or autism or any of you know, the neurological differences, please think about whether it actually applies to you. I'm going to make some generalizations today. You'll hear me do that for the sake of this podcast, but you always get to be in charge and decide whether that relates to your family or not, because I've never met two people with ADHD who are the same, right? They present differently, they have different strengths, different interests. So I just want to preface it by saying that. But then I think it's important to look at why. Why is separation higher? And of course, everyone would jump to, well, there's more stress, right? There's more stress. And I get that, because ADHD in essence is a dysregulated nervous system, which means your frustration tolerance, your stress response is going to be higher, which is going to make relationships a little bit more volatile sometimes if we're not handling stress. But there is other deeper reasons. So we know that the ADHD brain, and I hope you don't mind if I go through some of the reasons why it would be more challenging.
No, it'd be education for me as well, so that's fine.
Yeah, so let's look at why. So we really have a good basis of understanding. You know, I'm assuming that the person that's listened to this podcast might be on the verge of separation or considering separation, and you know, sometimes understanding why can allow us to treat it with compassion, or it can allow us to have a little bit more leeway, or it can empower us with tools to make that right decision for our family. So we know that the ADHD brain is based on novelty, so interest and novelty. The neurotypical brain is based on importance. Okay, so now we've got two completely different operating systems. So if you have one partner in the relationship who is neurodivergent and has a brain that is wired for interest and novelty versus someone who ranks things on importance. Now, this is a very simplified version. We know that there's a lot of other executive function challenges that come along with these things, but that in itself can be a very interesting mix, because at the start of the relationship, what are you? You're new, you are novel, you are interesting. And what happens when you're not new and novel anymore? You're not as interesting. You're not so interesting. So often the ADHD relationship goes in fast. Like, it's like you fall in love hard, you are infatuated, you are almost fixated on that person. You are the hyper-focus. And for the other person that is the subject of this infatuation, they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is everything I ever dreamed of. Like, a romance is here. But then that drops off a cliff at some point. And the neurotypical person might assume incorrectly that the other person's fallen out of love, that they're bored of them, that they are now looking for love elsewhere, whatever. And it's literally that interest and novelty component. And it actually goes the other way too, because the neurotypical person is basing things on importance. So they're sequencing, okay, what's the most important part of our day? What's our priorities? It's a relationship, blah, blah, blah. Now, then they end up doing a lot of the executive function for the ADHD person there, and then being bloody resentful about it, assuming that they're lazy, assuming that they're not doing it. Why do I have to always be the parent, blah, blah, blah. And you can see how this could cause a lot of conflict in relationships. It doesn't mean that we can't work around it, and understanding and recognizing won't from can't is very, very important here. We also know that phones play a big part in a lot of relationships' demise, because what have we got in our hands all the time? We've got these dopamine little seeking, like quick hits, dopamine. They're quite interesting and engaging for the ADHD brain. And so we've got one partner talking to the other person while they're just constantly on their phones and, you know, oh, you're not hearing me, you're not listening, I feel like you don't, you know, all of this stuff plays into it. We get parent and child roles happening a fair bit in relationships. So one person feeling like the parent, one person feeling like that they're being parented and nagged, and, you know, and these can be quite terminal for a lot of relationships. The ADHD symptoms of inattentiveness and impulsiveness can cause a lot more conflict. We know that. And then we have the ADHD tax, which is not handling finances properly, impulsive spending. Classic for me and my husband, he's neurodivergent, is, you know, he's like, we've got a budget, you know, save money, cut down on groceries, we've got to save this. And he's like, oh yeah, but I bought a jet ski. I met a guy on a job site, he had this jet ski going cheap, but I bought that. But you budget, you do that, but I'll buy a jet ski. It's fine. It's a good deal on that one. You know, so these things can add up. And, you know, and we also know that ADHD is genetic. So ADHD, the neurodivergence often runs in the family. So if you have a parent or both parents that have ADHD, we are likely to have children with ADHD. And that means that the parenting dynamic changes. It is a lot more work. We know that parenting a child that has ADHD is 3 times the amount of work than parenting a neurotypical child. So not only are these parents up against it in terms of challenges, but they are also up against it in the amount of work that they're doing. They are working harder than every other parent. So if you're listening to this and you have a child with ADHD or autism and you feel like you're working harder, I just want to honour that. Remember, you are. You're working 3 times harder, and you need a certificate and a parade in your honour. And I want you to know that we get that, and that's why it's harder. But I want to flip this now to what are the positives? Why did we fall in love in the first place? I can tell you why I fell in love with my husband. I just never know what he's going to do. I never know.
There's pros and cons of that.
I know, but I find it fascinating. I find the way that his brain works so interesting. Like, I just never know what's going to happen next. And I find that absolutely exciting. He is like genius level, like intelligent. He knows how to do things, like the way that his brain works. I'm constantly just going, what was that? I don't understand. Like he can, fix a truck with no manual, do all these scientific genius stuff that I have no idea how he does that. And and also he has a lot of compassion, a lot of kindness. He forgives really easily. All of the things that I often see with ADHD, when I do the personality testing or values testing on all of my clients, the things that come up consistently high for people with ADHD is love of learning. So they love to learn new skills, and also their sense of fairness and justice. They're very, very into things being fair. And I think that plays out beautifully in relationships when you're talking about, in terms of values. We want things to be fair, and it's beautiful to have a partner who values fairness and justice. It means they often are very great and at being able to take action on causes that are important to them. So there's lots of positives too, but sometimes we've got to be careful that some of those challenges just don't make us forget about all of those. Let's bring those to the surface too.
Yeah, I feel like that is a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
As well, in relation to, because I probably didn't really think of it from that perspective. And then that's assuming the other person does have ADHD. I know that being diagnosed for a female, at least in their 30s and their 40s, is becoming quite common. I'm assuming that's because it was maybe thought of as like a boy thing back when we were younger. I'm not quite sure.
We've done,
but so you go.
Oh, I was going to say, we've done females a terrible disservice. And so in the past, we misdiagnosed. Now, this is a generalization because it can be, we've got 3 types of ADHD recognized. We've got inattentive, hyperactive, and combined, right? And most people are combined type. But in females, generally, not all the time, because they can really show that hyperactivity gene as well. But when in females, that hyperactivity doesn't tend to show in their body, it shows in their brain. So their body is looking calm, but that hyperactivity is, their brain is going 100 miles an hour. So in the past, we misdiagnosed them as anxiety, or we misdiagnosed them as bipolar. And so now... Yeah, so now we've got all these kids that we're getting so much better at picking it up and screening for ADHD. Kids are getting diagnosed and the mums are going, oh, hold on a minute. That was me. This is me. This is me. This is me. And now, it's quite a sad story because they've missed out on intervention. They've missed out on all the support. And we know that those big life transitions is where the wheels fall off. So when they tend to go quite okay, like this hypervigilance of being organised and keeping all the balls in there, and then you have kids and that kind of throws everything out. And then you might go through menopause and that throws everything out. So we really need to do better when it comes to females and ADHD. The boys got diagnosed early.
Yeah, like I was speaking before that I had a girlfriend that just got diagnosed with ADHD. Her kids, both her boys have ADHD. I think there could be, or I'm a little bit, there's additional needs there. I think ADHD is at least one. And then she'll show me like the test, I suppose, that the doctor made her do. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, yes. Like I'm going through it like, oh my gosh, I've pretty well got the exact same answers as you. So then in my mind, I'm like, wow, that like could make a whole pile of sense. Like I've just turned 42, so I'm probably fitting into that, that age range. So yeah, and I guess part of it was also that, it was shameful to have ADHD or autism, like you were frowned upon because you were different or, and things and things like that. But I've also heard as well that there's to appease parents and to appease people that there's an over-diagnosis of ADHD. And I understand that we're veering a little bit, but we will veer back because I think this is all relevant. Like, do you think that ADHD is an over-diagnosis to just go, hey, you want something, here's some meds, this will, close you, shut you up type thing? And in relation to, seeing whether you do have ADHD, there are tests, I believe, that you can do online to kind of gauge, because I didn't realise there was 3 levels either. But, there are tests online that apparently you can do to see whether you possibly do have it. And then even trying to get that referral, like there's massive long wait lists. Like I feel like I've just asked like 50 million questions in that 1 minute there. But I suppose, yeah, is, I just asked, I'm trying to work out what question to do first, but like, you know what I mean? Like, is there an overdiagnosis? If you think you've got it, you've got wait times that are just blown out. Like, how can that all be managed? Because that would also really go to stress in a relationship, because and if you're too, you're feeling too embarrassed to tell your partner, hey, I have ADHD, and then you're spiraling out of control because you might not be the one that's giving them affection, or they're trying to give them affection, and someone's checked out. Like, there's so many things, right?
So many things. And, there's so many things. And, it is a bit of an overwhelmed system at the moment. And I would say, like, statistically in Australian classrooms today, we've got about 5 kids with ADHD, right? So it's a pretty common neurodivergence, like neurological difference. And we know that, if you have ADHD, you're also more likely to have autism or even be gifted, there's a whole host of things that go along with it. But I think that in terms of being overdiagnosed, I'm not really worried about that. I would still say we're chronically underdiagnosed, because in the previous generations, we just didn't know. We didn't have the screening that we do now. So we now have really, really good screenings. Like, of course, yes, do some things on the internet, but really the person that you need to see if you're an adult is a psychiatrist who has experience with ADHD, the testing that they go through is actually quite vigorous. And how much executive function does it take to book all those appointments? You've got to go to the GP first, you've got to go to referral, you've got to make it to all those appointments. Like, that's almost a test in itself for people with ADHD to get to those things, to get all this stuff done. And also, I want to also say that that in of itself, medication is one of the tools that you can have for ADHD, but it's not the only tool. We know that ADHD is a spectrum. Same with autism, it's a spectrum. So I want to really open the conversation about that and say that there's a whole host of different tools. What I do as an ADHD coach is really equip people with tools to be able to support their executive function challenges. We know with ADHD that there are certain executive function impairments that come along with that, and I see those like skills that you can, that muscles that you can build. And so you've got to have the right systems. It's not about trying to force them into a neurotypical system, like just, do that. We want to have really customized systems for the ADHD brain. And we know, the great bit is we know so much more about it now. We're learning more every day. And so if you think that you might be neurodivergent, there's no harm in going and just getting it, going through the testing and checking it out, because you're unlikely to walk out of there with a diagnosis if you aren't neurodivergent. Like, it's just too thorough. And I also want to say that the facts that we are absorbing about autism and ADHD, say from TikTok, we've seen this massive big spike in, I've lost my wallet, I must have ADHD. Oh, I've done this, like I must have ADHD on TikTok and all this. Now, America did a study last year about the facts of ADHD on TikTok. 50% were incorrect, okay?
Oh, wow.
So, just
like
be careful. Be careful where you're getting your information from. And if you are going to see an ADHD coach, make sure they are ICF credentialed. They've done ADHD specific training. Anyone can call themselves a coach. Doesn't mean they've done anything. We want to make sure that we're getting our information from the right professionals, because otherwise there's just a whole lot of, interesting information out there that isn't really verified. So we go to that psychiatrist, get that proper process, and you're unlikely to walk out of there with an incorrect diagnosis. I can tell you that.
Yeah, and don't be ashamed of it either.
No.
You said that there's many, there's, we often think about the cons of things and not the pros. Like, that could be your superpower. You are who you are, because of those additional gifts that you may or may not have. So, Yeah, so yeah, that was absolutely that was great, awesome. Thank you very much for that. I know I just slammed like a pile of stuff at you. I feel like we're gonna have to at least do like another podcast on this. But to get back on topic, so I had said before I'm the lawyer that would like to save a relationship. Caveat is obviously domestic violence. If it's not safe to do so, I probably wouldn't recommend that you do that. But one of the questions we ask when clients come into us and saying they're separating, are we definitely done? Is there anything we can do? We'll ask for like the cause of the separation, because that can come into play, whether it's cheating, whether it's addiction, whether it's, whatever it might be. I feel that is useful for us to know. I know not all lawyers do that, but we do that. Say that it is that stress, say that you might be ADHD yourself and you have children who do. Actually, first of all, to go back a bit, what would a tip be if you have a child? So let's just go with a typical 2-child family. If you have a child who has ADHD or those neurodivergent needs, and a child who is not, do you have tips in relation to how to not make the child who doesn't have ADHD feel that they are lesser because they may not be getting the attention of like their sibling? Does that make sense? Any tips for that?
Yes, yeah. Well, and this is actually goes into a classroom tip as well, because as a family coach, I tend to, can I tell you a little bit about my story about why I became a coach? Because I think it plays into this. So when I spoke to my husband when we got married, and I spoke to him about his ADHD and him growing up, he knew he had ADHD? Oh, yeah. Someone across the street can tell it for my husband. He's very hyperactive in presentation, right? He's absolutely amazing. He's a powerhouse, right? And so he had an awful time growing up with ADHD. It was misunderstood. Like, this is 80s and 90s. Like, this is not our best work in ADHD, right? He was banned from the classroom. They used to just get him to do odd jobs around the school because he was, he had lots of fighting and aggression and bullying, and it was traumatic. He never got invited to a birthday party. It was just socially isolated, awful. And so we went on to have our first child, and I was looking at my gorgeous little boy, knowing that he was very similar to my husband, like same body movement. I don't know. There was just, you could just see it from very early on, and thinking, oh, I'm not going to have him have that same trauma that my husband did. How can I spare him from this? Because so I got to work and I started learning everything I could about ADHD and really absorbing everything I could in hopes to spare my child from some of that trauma. And so I became a woman obsessed. I was like trialing everything, running weird experiments on my household. In between that, I had 2 other kids also having ADHD as well. And I would do all these weird experiments and like they'd come into a room and it'd be minimalist, and then I'd document their reactions, and then I'd come and be all cluttered and I'd document their reactions. And one day they're going to write a terrible book about me called Weird Stuff Mum Made Us Do. And it was just made with love. Yeah, it's love. They're going to shame me about it on a podcast of their own. But what I was trying to do is trying to experiment and trying to find different ways of working out. And where that comes back to your question is, I was focusing all my attention on the child with ADHD. So at that stage, we had my first son diagnosed, and we threw $30,000 at every single therapy, neurofeedback, psychology, like everything. We were doing everything, all the special diets. We were doing single thing that I could to support my eldest son, because the other 2 didn't have a diagnosis at that time. Now, what I learned is when we focus, all those things really helped to a certain degree, but our home life still sucked. It sucked. It was awful. I was crying every afternoon. I used to have to psychologically prepare myself to walk back in the door because it was just so chaotic and so awful. And I got sick and I burnt myself out, and it was just horrendous. And we were desperately looking for answers. We were like just trying, and everywhere we met with brick walls, because ADHD doesn't attract any extra funding or support or schools. It's just a nightmare the way we handle and support ADHD in this country. And so what I learned is that when we focus all our attention on and strategies on the child or the family member with ADHD, it doesn't work. It burns everybody out. It's no good for anyone. But what we do is, when we look at it from a family unit perspective, I don't care about what other families doing, what Joe down the street's doing. I care about what my family doing. What are we doing in line with our values? When we looked at it as a complete unit, that's when we started having success. And the beautiful thing is, once you learn about the ADHD brain, or you learn about the brain with autism, is that when we create systems, and I'll tell you my favorite quote in a minute, but when we create systems that work for the individual with ADHD, they tend to work very well for neurotypical people too. This same in the classroom. When we make accommodations for kids with ADHD, and I know our beautiful teachers, if you're listening to this, they're working so hard, right? And when we make accommodations for the child with ADHD, it tends to benefit the whole class. But when we create systems that are focused on neurotypical people, only the neurotypical people benefit. Right? Yeah. So this is why it's important to look at the family unit and not just focus on the individual. So my answer to your question is, when you've got a child that's neurotypical and a child with neurodivergence, it tends to, if we roll out a strategy or we roll out a system, we roll it out across the board, because no strategy actually is a disadvantage to that neurotypical child. It tends to lift everybody up. And we know that we need to have, regardless of whether your children are neurotypical or neurodivergent, we need to have one-on-one time to connect with our kids. So whether that be just that short 20-minute little burst of going for a milkshake, or having those little connection points, because our kids are connection kids. They're always going to do more for people that they're connected with. And so, having that little balance to have time, like I know if we go out as a family and there's 3 kids, that's going to need it's a full-scale military deployment at this point in time, right? So, but one-on-one, I can really connect and really hear what my kids are having to say and really have that opportunity for connection, which is so, so important. So knowing that about your family, taking some of the load off, so having a little bit of time with your neurotypical child, having a little bit of time with your neurodivergent child, keeping it nice and even, because our sense of fairness and justice is high. And having those, it doesn't have to be a weekend away, just those little 20-minute little moments to soften some of that load, because at the end of the day, raising kids is hard, parenting is hard, raising kids with additional needs is harder, and so we need to be able to balance and soften out some of those edges too. So I hope that answers your question there.
No, it does. I was even thinking that, I'm like, we're willing to do like one-on-one with our own kids. Knocking on, like, no, it's been a bit slack with that, but they're on school holidays next week, so I can schedule that in then. But it was really interesting to hear. So, for a child, and again, I'm sorry, I'm using my terminology only because I'm still learning about it. How to, if you have a child that has ADHD and a child that doesn't, trying to put a routine in place for the child that does have ADHD that is the routine of the child that doesn't have it, like, it's not going to.
It's across the board.
And it's going to be, it's not going to work. It's going to be stressful. They're going to rebel. It's going to be horrible. And I suppose that's a form of like segregation as well. You're kind of separating, how you treat, possibly each child. But to hear that, the routine that you have for your child that has ADHD or the additional needs will most likely fit into the routine with your other children and the family as a whole. I suppose, I don't know where I've got it from. I hadn't thought of it that way. I know it probably sounds really dumb, but, because I do have friends that, have children with additional needs. Some of them are only child, some of them have siblings. And for me, I guess I've always seen it's always about the child that has those additional needs. And that's not saying like they're bad parents or anything like that either. It's just, I suppose that's what I've seen for me. And to know that, there probably isn't such a big gap between the routine that you might have for the child with ADHD and the rest of the family members that don't have. It's, good to hear that, you're highly likely going to be able to blend the two together to make that experience a whole lot less stressful, and to have that one-on-one time with your kids, whether you go for that milkshake or you take them to that movie, or you have that quality TV time with them or whatever. And as you said, going out is a whole other experience as well. If you're going out for tea or for a barbecue or something like that, that's going to require probably a different approach than if you were at home. But I'm hoping that, well, it was definitely helpful for me. I'm sure that people listening, they'll find that really helpful in just knowing that, don't try and cram a routine into your child that has ADHD that's not suitable for that child, because it is probably not going to work. They're probably going to rebel, but to go the other way and to know that, we are still a family, these are our values, this is, what we do. I think that's absolutely beautiful. And I could definitely see that would be an approach to try and lessen the stress, the additional stress that you might have within a household, and even trying to remember, as you said, there are many beautiful traits that you have with your husband and your kids, and sometimes that's easier to forget than, if you have all that negative thrown at you each day. So, just changing that routine to kind of suit the family as a whole is really beautiful. Do you have any other tips in relation to, you have your program and your membership and everything that is coming at the moment. If people want to learn more, we'll chat about that towards the end. But do you have, maybe you're in between the stages of waiting to get in to see a psychiatrist, or, you might be in the early stages of trying to get a diagnosis. Do you have any tips for those people who may not have that experience with it yet and trying to, learn all the words and do all the things? What are some tips in relation to just, people that might be starting out in the early stages of getting their kids diagnosed, or maybe even an adult? This is probably still relevant for adults, getting diagnosis.
Well, I think that first I want to say, do not be scared of the label, right? I know that you were talking about that shame component that we had in the years gone by. That is kind of going. It's not completely gone. I'd love to flush that one down the toilet, but that shame thing is going, because now we are honoring that. What a boring world it would be if we all had the same neurotype, right? If there was no one that was look at all the amazing people with different brains that we have that are celebrities and that are doing incredible things and, innovating such incredible things that is mind-blowing for the rest of us. That we don't want to be afraid of the label anymore. We want to, and it's been my experience that as parents, we shouldn't be afraid of the label, because I work with a lot of adults with ADHD, and before they might say to me, I was diagnosed when I was 7, but my parents didn't tell me about it. Or, this is all this trauma that happened in the 80s and 90s. Yeah, special time. And, it's been my experience that when we don't give the label of ADHD or ASD, people give themselves labels, and they're way more damaging than those other labels. Okay, so they call themselves lazy, they call themselves stupid, they call themselves, all sorts of things. I would much rather have the label of ADHD or ASD. I would much rather have that label than lazy and stupid, and and the stupid has potential on everyone's report card. Let's get rid of that. Yeah. So I don't think we should be afraid of the label. I think we should celebrate the label, and we should really go in with a strength-based approach. We know that the beautiful ADHD brain has really incredible strengths, and we want it. They're quick processes. They cycle through emotion fast. They are often very, very good in an emergency. How many paramedics do I work with? How many ER doctors and nurses do I work with? They are good they are the people that you want in the crisis, right? We need these people to support, to be there and show us their gifts. So go in with that strength-based approach. So if you have a child with ADHD, or you suspect they have ADHD, be talking about what their strengths are often, because they get so much negative feedback and corrections from the world. Lots of stop that, put that down, why did you do that, all of that stuff. We're not going to be talking about potential, because we're on a different operating system. We're going to be talking about all the things that they do naturally well. We're going to lean into that hard. And we do that in ADHD coaching. We really look at what a person is good at and then try and pull that across into things that they're struggling with, because it's much easier to establish systems around that. And then my second tip is so don't be afraid of the label. Go in and go through the process, celebrate the strengths, and to know that there's this whole kind of feeling that you can just try harder out of ADHD, and it makes me want to vomit. This try harder concept, it's kind of implying that the ADHD, some of the
don't try.
They're not trying, right?
Yeah.
And I can tell you that every single person with ADHD that I see is trying way harder than anyone gives them credit for. And so I really like the saying, you don't need to try harder, you're trying hard enough, but we need to try differently. So what we want to do as a family, and, you know, trying to make this our family motto, that we do things a little bit differently, and that's okay. Right? So we're going to do things that suit us, our operating system. We're going to do things in line with our values. We don't have to worry about what everyone else is doing. We're not comparing our family with other people's, because we need to try differently, and we need to honour what that looks like for the ADHD brain or the ASD brain. And I really want to, my favourite quote, which I mentioned before, is when you're working, you know, when you have a family that has extra needs, and I love this quote so much, I think I'm going to get it tattooed across my forehead one day, is the James Clear quote, which says, "We do not rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems." Okay. Yeah. Now, the reason that I love this so much is, number one, because I'm a systems queen. I love creating systems for people with ADHD because I find it so empowering. We can have all these goals. Oh, I want to do this one day. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And they're goals, and they're great, right? That's really cool. I think it's lovely to have goals. A lot of people with ADHD find goals a little bit triggering, but I think it's great to have goals and dreams. But I also think what we want to do is know that where to focus our energy is not on goal setting, is on systems. Create systems and scaffolding that works with your brain, because that's where you fall to. So we can make goals for when everything's perfect. Oh, I'll be happy when, I'll create this, like I'll do this when. But that when, that we know we're living an intense life, right? That might not ever come. So what we want is, we want systems that we fall to, systems that when things aren't going well, that pick us up and support us. What systems that work uniquely for whatever your family is doing, for whatever your relationship is doing. That's where we want to focus our energy. It's systems. So a good idea is to have a look at where your family is experiencing friction, where your relationship is experiencing friction. That's where you throw your energy. So if there's, you know, your child is having trouble brushing their teeth, and you know that they're going to throw that friction point at you every single day, and there's going to be a major meltdown, you know, that's where we go, okay, we know this is a friction point. We need a system around it. We need a bit of scaffolding around it. How can we try differently? What is this going to look like? And so, you know, putting your energy there is my number one tip. And whether you need support with a properly trained ADHD coach, or whether you need that extra support to create those systems for those practical life skills things, because everyone talks about meltdowns with ADHD or ASD. Everyone talks about meltdowns, but it's been my experience that that's not what burns relationships out. That's not what burns families out. We tend to handle those pretty well, actually. The everyday grind, everyday friction, everyday little bits of tension that we face, that's what burns you out. Those are the things that we need systems around to support and save these families, because we know that they're up against it. So let's put our energy where it's needed.
Yeah, and you're not going to fix everything overnight. And I kind of, when you're saying like the friction, I kind of like the bottlenecks. Like, what's the bottleneck in my business that's stopping us from doing the next best, you know, thing? And like the friction's the same. So if you know there's going to be, you know, a tense moment every night or every morning when the teeth are going to get brushed, how much easier is your life going to be if you keep trying different techniques on, especially with the first thing in the morning, because that's pretty well how you're going to dictate your day, right? So, right, okay, well, the most frustrating thing at the moment, or the thing I'm going to, you know, lose my mind over, is like brushing teeth. Cool. What can we change to make this process different? Do I need to, I know there's like sensory toothbrushes, like do we need to look for something like that? There, you know, I'm sure there's other options out there. The sensory toothbrush is anything that comes to my mind. Or, you know, brushing hair, you know, there's special hair brushes and stuff, like, you know, for detangling and stuff like that. Is that an issue? And as you said, it's all those little things that just keep adding up until the point like where you explode. So even for families that don't have like ADHD, you know, if brushing teeth or doing hair, or I know my kids used to hate, well, one child used to hate me doing her hair, and every morning it was like just have to brush your hair for school, you know. But if you start dealing with all those little small things, that's, you know, it's going to make your day a lot easier. It's like, yay, cool, I've had a win for that. Like, what's you know, what's the next thing? Is it you know, is it dinner? Is it, you know, is it eating? Is it packing lunch? Is it getting dressed? Is it, you know, whatever it might be, those little wins will add up, and that's going to make a big difference to your child, to your family, to your self-esteem, because you're having those little, you're ticking those little wins off. So I think that's relevant across really any family, not just kids with ADHD. Something that did come to mind when you're talking about routines for your family. So is there a tip if your child was invited to a birthday party or a sleepover? How do you approach that? Do you let, the parent know that, your child has ADHD or they, because obviously, your husband was left out of all that stuff, so you don't want that happening with your own child. How do you approach birthday parties and sleepovers? How do you approach them? There was nothing else.
So thinking about birthday parties, I mean, it's awesome that your child is being invited, right? And we want to set them up for success for it. And this is going to be very variable based on the child. And I really want to empower parents to honour we want to put our kids in situations where they shine. And that's not going to be this for everyone. We've got children just like adults. Some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts, some of us can do really well with the sensory input of a party, some of us can't. And that's okay. I've almost had lost it in those play centres myself. They're very sensorily overwhelming. So we want to put our children in areas where we know that they shine. So it tends to be ADHD, it tends to be outside, active, some sensory components there. But so firstly, looking at that, and if it's an area if it's in a location or it's a time of day or something that you suspect your child isn't going to shine with that, and you know your child better than I do, then maybe going along for part of it or going along with them to be able to support them, keeping the rest of the day quite quiet or neutral before we go to that party, which we know is going to be sensorily. Using social stories, so looking up the place on the website, showing them. We know the ADHD brain is an anxious brain, so showing them what it's going to look like when they get there, talking about how long it's going to take to get there, printing out some pictures of it, so that they don't get there and it's just a shock to their system. This is what happens when... Yeah, they're familiar with the surrounding, talking to them what to do if it gets overwhelming, like maybe we can go to the bathroom, run our hands under the cold water. Having cold water is a really good sensory, it just brings it all down a little bit. So, really talking them through, asking our kids, our kids are so clever. They know exactly what they need to do in these situations. They can't think of it, they can't access it when they're dysregulated. So asking them before, what do you want me to do if this happens? What would you like me, is there any way that we can support you if this happens? They know. They'll be like, oh no, I just need to have maybe I need to look at photos on your phone or something like that to just regulate a little bit. But so knowing where your child shines, that really is helpful, because every child has areas that they tend to do very well in. And so we're going to lean towards those things. And if it's a situation where your child, you anticipate that your child might not shine, then you might want to prepare that you will do a hasty exit if it doesn't work out. So you can say to the parent, who's hosting the party, we're going to come along for a little while. I just want to let you know my child has additional needs. We're going to come along, see how we do, and I don't want you to be offended if we need to do a quick exit. I would be perfectly fine with the parent letting me know that. And also, I'm a big fan of letting other parents know that's what's going on, because I think that when parents know, they treat it with compassion. And if they don't, I don't want to be at their stupid party anyway. So it's fine. So I will always be letting people know and giving people the information of what they need to for my child to succeed. And most of the time it is sometimes our children can really surprise us as well. We can think, oh, this is going to be really hectic, but then when we get there, they do well, because most kids with ADHD love new novelty and sensory input. But if you have a sensory avoiding child, then we might need to make some accommodations for that. We might need to have a little break, go for shorter time limits or whatever. So in terms of sleepovers, I'm not a big fan of the sleepover, and my parents will my kids will probably hate me for that forever. I don't like it because I tend to keep my play dates 2 to 3 hour windows. And it's been my experience that you get the kid's best self for 2 to 3 hours. And then after that, it goes a little bit Lord of the Flies. And so so I try to keep it short. Everyone's doing their best work. We're taking risks, but it's, calculated risks. After that time, like I was watching a play date that we had here on the weekend, and they were jumping off the rock into the pool, and it was going really well. And then by the third hour, we're getting a bit sloppy with our jump, like it was a bit more edgy, and so I'm calling it then.
Yeah.
Now sleepovers also, in terms of, there's lots more safety risks, there's a lot more anxiety that happens at nighttime. It can just be a trickier thing to navigate. So unless you're sure, or perhaps family is a better choice, but unless you're sure that your child can shine in that situation, just cut it out. I think it's a lot to expect from a child when they're tired. And we know that if we're talking transitions, people who are neurodivergent can have different, we call it transition cache, but like their brain struggles to switch tasks and change. And we're asking a lot from our kids to switch all day. They switch from tasks all day, switch locations all day, and it all has a cost. By the end of the day, it's harder. It becomes, they're tireder. Those transitions that are harder to do. So you're not really putting them in a situation where they can shine. They tend to be better at that in the morning. So, having that safety in that evening is a nice thing to come back to. But,
would you control sleepovers at your house? So having the opposite, or pretty well same thing?
Yeah.
I the afternoon.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, I might just be selfish about it because, I've sat up with a few kids at like 2:00 in the morning and, called different parents and things like that. But I just don't think they need it. I don't think it adds anything. It's kind of like when you go out on the town as adults. I know that nothing, like you can go to dinner, you can have a few drinks, and then nothing good happens after 10:00, right? It's more of the same. People just get drunker and a little bit crazier, and it's like, and a bit more aggressive. So I would, you feel like you can customize it and cut things off based on whatever your family is, that whatever allows them to shine, because I don't want to put them in a position that they're not going to shine. Now, a good example of that is, and like aside from sleepovers and play dates, is supermarket shopping. My family is not good. We're not our best selves in the supermarket shop. It doesn't work out for us. There's fluorescent lighting, there's lots of noises, there's lines, there's a whole host of things that are not going to set my family up for success. Yeah. So I'm not going to do it. I'm going to order online. I'm not going to continually put them in that situation and hope that it's going to be different that time. I'm going to have a different system. I'm going to order online. I'm going to have a reoccurring checklist. I'm going to get it delivered to my house. Now, if you do see me in there, something's gone wrong and it's an emergency, that's fine, right? I'll deal with that and I'll be flexible when it comes up, but it's not going to be something that I'm going to continually put my kids in that position and expect something different. I already know, I've got evidence for that it is not a happy time for my family.
It is a hard no.
It's a hard no for that one. And I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to spend my energy or my kids' transition cash on that one. I'll spend it on something way more fun and way more cooler than that.
Yeah, and it's good, like when you were talking about that before, so I don't know whether Woolworths does it. I know Coles have like an hour or two where, again, I'm not trying to offend here because I'm probably going to use the wrong wording, but it's like between like 10 to 12 or something where they like dim the lights and I think they can the music. And so, it's a sign that I suppose that I'm not aware of anybody else that does it. I just know that Coles does it because I thought there was something wrong with their lighting when I first saw it. But, they're acknowledging that, this could be a hard time for people. As you said, you probably do click and collect or delivery or something if that's not, where you're going to shine. But it's been recognised, I suppose, as, hey, okay, so if you need to come in where our lights are going to be dim, we're going to have no music, and I'm not quite sure what else they do. It's safe to come in between here and here if it's a quick grab, if it's, whatever it might be. So, I think that's really, really good. So we're nearly up to an hour. So, God, like, we just could keep talking. So I suppose to start to wrap up, do you have any other tips? So we've kind of spoken about sleepovers, having one neurodivergent child with another. Is there a really, surefire tip that you can finish us off with in relation to trying to keep the harmony? I know that some of the things you've said, I could see me implementing in my family. Just, if your kids get hyped up, and as you said, you can't kind of, regulate your emotions. If you get, stressed or something, what would you like me to do? So when that opportunity happens, you're like, cool, all right, so here it is. So, I think most of these tips work regardless of whether you have ADHD or not. But in the bit of trying to save a relationship, do you have, a last surefire tip, whether that's looking at, reflecting on maybe the pros of the day, so, the wins of, so we had successful brushing our teeth, just instead of trying to focus on the negatives, just anything that you want to mention before we wrap up today.
Yeah, I love that. I've got like 3 little tips, if that's okay.
So I'm going to go for another hour.
Yeah, just another hour. What have we got?
It's fine. People can pause it and start again. It's all good.
I was just thinking about that emotional component, right? And the dynamics that often happens is we've got one person in the relationship, doing the executive function and and the other person being perceived as getting nagged, and so one of the strategies that really quickly that tends to work really well is we have a shared note in our notes in our phone, so you can do this collaborate function on your notes, where we put tasks, right? And I put, because I'm the organizer, if that hasn't become clear through this podcast, I don't know what has. So I'm the organizer. And so I put the things that I know my husband could do to help, right? Yeah. And we have an arrangement because I'm not going to nag him about it. I'm not his mum. I'm not going to nag him about it. So we have an arrangement that those things can sit there for 4 weeks. If they don't get done on that 4 weeks, I put them on Airtasker. Okay, now that thing has that one little tool of having what we agreed on this. This was not me telling him what I'm going to do, because I don't know if anyone's noticed, but people with ADHD usually hate being told what to do. This is an agreed system. We don't come in and tell them. We asked for their advice and we asked them to collaborate with us. So we've got a system. I put things on the list. If that thing doesn't get done, then that's fine. I'm going to respect it. I'm putting it on Airtasker, but he has to pay for it, so it's fine. So it's awesome. It's a good system. And then the other one is that, we tend to get really caught up. People with ADHD process emotions fast. They feel things in the extreme. So they feel anger in the extreme. They feel happiness in the extreme, like everything. They cycle through things really, really quickly. And in relationships, we tend to hold on to those. And so we might see the anger and we might see that explosion and we might see that extreme sadness or whatever they're cycling through. And we take it and we hold it and we make it a piece of our relationship. I don't want people to do that, because they cycle through things so much quicker. And so we just let it pass. You don't need to take it. You don't need to make their emotion a part of you. You don't need to hold on to your partner's anything. You let them cycle through things, and it doesn't mean anything about you. Like, my husband can completely lose it over something, and then 2 seconds later he's like, oh yeah, no, that's over now. I've forgotten about that, right? So what we want to do is, when you have ADHD in the relationship, just let them cycle through it. It goes quickly. The good news is that they cycle through emotions fast. And so you just let it pass. You don't have to get involved. You don't have to just let it process. And I see that is quite a toxic thing for a lot of relationships. It breeds contempt, because the other party, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical, they grab that emotion and they make it mean something about themselves, but really it's just their nervous system cycling through whatever it is. So just honor that, let it go, don't make it mean anything about you, because I can guarantee you, 15 minutes down the track, they're like, oh yeah, no, that was 15 minutes ago and I've forgotten about that, and now I'm fine. And so that's okay, don't make it mean anything. And then my very last tip for our beautiful couples that are, perhaps stuck in some of the hardships of this, is to bring it back to laughter always. One of the things that I think my relationship does well, and it doesn't do a lot of things well, but one of the things that it does well is we laugh a lot. We laugh at ourselves. We laugh at our ridiculousness. We just laugh, right? And if you can bring things back to laughter and laugh at the truly outrageous things that go on in my house, that if you can have a giggle about it, maybe not in the heat of the moment, but later, once you've cycled through that, and you can giggle together, that will bring you back together. If that laughter goes, if you stop laughing, it's very hard to come back together again. Yeah. So laugh, enjoy it. It's a short time. Having a partner with ADHD, it's a wild ride. You never know what you're going to get, right? But it's interesting and it's exciting and it's a roller coaster that, embrace it. Embrace neurological difference. Embrace different brains, and we don't want everyone to think like us. Like, just because we do one thing well, they might do something else well. So honor that. Do the things that you guys do well. Because how boring if I couldn't have a relationship with someone with a brain like me. I mean, we'd get a lot done, right? But it would be so boring. It'd be so boring, but I'd be very efficient.
And your kids look up to what you're doing too, right? So, the kids aren't silly. So, if they see you, making it work and laughing and, doing the positive things, that's just going to reflect positively on your kids. So when they grow up and start having relationships, they've got, they've seen how it's done, I suppose. So I've absolutely loved today. I feel like there is another one or two because there's many other things that have come to mind as we've been talking today. But if there are people that would like to work with you direct, as you said, anybody can call themselves a coach. So, and you certainly do have the qualifications to help beautiful families through this transition, or even adults through this transition. So if people would like to reach out to you, we'll have your details below as well. But what can you offer to help families through, through their, what am I looking for?
Supporting their family dynamic.
Yeah, that's it. So Monday, I'm like, yep, I've got nothing.
Yep. So you can have a look at thefunctionalfamily.com. We've got lots of free resources on there. We've got a free support group called ADHD and Families on Facebook. I think there's like 14,000 members in there. Oh, wow. I think I'm well over 35,000 families that I've supported now. So, if you have ADHD in the family and you're looking for support, stop trying to do it alone. It's like you've got to try differently, right? So what we want to do is really empower people to try it differently. And, really honor, the more you learn about ADHD, the more exciting it is. And the more you can treat it with compassion and see all the amazing things that comes along with it. And I've got a membership where we empower people with, tools and practical tools, and it's anything that saves time and capacity. I've got a program for parents of primary school age kids. We've got different private coaching things happening, and lots of a podcast as well, ADHD Families podcast. Go and listen to that. But really, it's about getting into the community, surrounding yourself by other people that understand what you're going through and understand the amazingness and some of the challenges as well. So you can have that support so that we can have a happy, enjoyable, functional, crazy life together, right? That's what it's about.
Yeah, and reduce the 60, 70, 80% chances of separation to, dipping that way down. And your support, that's not just Australia-based, that's like international as well?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for today. I've absolutely loved it, and I definitely think there are some takeaways, whether you have neurodivergency in the family or not. I know there's definitely things that I've taken away from that. So thank you very much, Sharon, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.